See that there was a lot of applause. Couldn't be saying anything derogatory, so I assume that. By the way, I'll treat this as net practice for tomorrow. I have never, in my 22 years of politics, 23 years of politics, I have never seen anticipation for anything like my speech tomorrow in the United Nations General Assembly. The closest feeling I can tell you for tomorrow, the closest feeling I've had in the past was before the World Cup cricket final I played a long time ago. So I'll treat today as net practice. Okay, now let me just, I won't speak for very long, I'll just speak for about 10 minutes. But I want to hear your questions, and it's much easier for me to interact with you. I came here 11 years ago, and I remember I had a very good interaction here at the Asia Society. My vision for Pakistan. My vision for Pakistan is what was the vision of the founding fathers of Pakistan. And that vision was the first Muslim state set up by our Holy Prophet, peace be upon him, the state of Medina. Not many Muslims also understand that the state of Medina was a modern state. It was the state it laid the foundation of the Muslim civilization. And the qualities in that state, the characteristics, sadly, hardly anyone of our politicians, hardly any one of them understand. So this is when I started politics 23 years ago. This was my vision. Now I'll explain to you what were the characteristics. Number one, a welfare state. A state it was a humane state. The Prophet set up the first welfare state in the history of mankind. It was the first state where there was progressive taxation. The rich paid the tax and it was spent on the less privileged. It was a state which took responsibility of the weak, of widows, of orphans, of handicapped, of the poor people. The state had rule of law. Everyone was equal. Did not matter what religion you had. So I often quote this, that one of the most revered figures in Islam was the fourth Khalifa of the state of Medina. He lost a case against a Jewish citizen. So it showed two things. One, there was rule of law, that even the head of state was not above law. Secondly, the minorities were equal citizens. They had equal rights. And of course, our Prophet, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he also, he signed covenants with the Jews, with the Christians at the time. There's a famous a covenant he signed with St. Catherine's Church, which I believe still exists, where he pledged to protect the places of worship of Christians till the day of judgment. So it was a state that gave rights to all religions as equal citizens. Then the Prophet's famous last sermon where he said, all of us are children of Adam. So all of us are equal, whatever the color of our skin. And then it was revolution at the time when women were given rights, right to property. And the famous, the line that man has rights over woman as a woman has rights over man. Slavery, the whole society is dependent upon slavery. So releasing a slave was considered one of the highest deeds a man could do, a person could do. But then, since the whole society depended upon slavery, They were ordered that the slaves should be treated as family members. And because of that tradition, in Muslim world, you had slave kings, slave dynasties. India, there was a slave dynasty. The Mamluks in Egypt were slaves who became kings. What was for us, for Pakistan, when I look at my own country, we moved so far away from the ideal that was what Pakistan should have been. It was the only state that was created in the name of Islam. And we moved, we became exactly the opposite, a society where the powerful had one law and the weak were from a different, in fact, were out of the law. Most of the people don't have access to justice. So hence, the cornerstone of a society is rule of law. So therefore, I call my movement for justice. And I believe that rule of law is the fundamental thing which differentiates a civilized society from one which is not civilized. When we took power 13 months ago, the biggest problem we faced was our current account deficit. We inherited two of the biggest deficits, the current account and the fiscal deficit. And in order to fix that, we had to make reforms. The reason why you have a deficit is because your system is not functional. The fact that you are spending more than you're earning means that there is a fundamental problem in your economy. So we started changing that. And I'm proud to say that after probably one of the most difficult 1 year in my life, finally I can say that there has been a change where we have brought down that current account deficit, which is the fundamental thing. No matter how much, even if your economy is growing, if your current account is in a deficit, if that is not balanced, you're always going to be in trouble because your currency is going to be hit. And once your currency loses value, everything, investment stops, inflation goes up, and of course it raises poverty. So this is the one big achievement I can say. We have brought down the deficit almost by 70% in 1 year. The other problems we face, of course, the biggest problem is fixing the institutions. You can destroy an institution very quickly, but to fix the institution does take time. So the one institution we are trying to fix is our FBR, which is the agency that collects taxes. Pakistan has a very low tax GDP ratio. So fixing that, the tax system has been the biggest challenge. And I'm again proud to say that the last 2 months, we have collected the highest tax ever, despite the fact that our economy still not got moving because of the restructuring. The external challenges, obviously, the most important thing for anyone who assumes power is to reduce poverty. And that was from the first word go, that was the biggest goal. Now, in order to raise people out of poverty, the next most important thing is to have stability. So we have the Afghanistan issue, on the other side, Iran, and then our relationship with India. So immediately we try to mend fences. Afghanistan, we have mended fences. We have very good interaction with the Afghan government. With Iran, we hope to play a big part. I have, met the Iranian president. Of course, President Trump also asked me if we can play a part. I have also Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman that we should play a part in reducing the tensions. We're trying our best. It's quite a complex issue, but we will try our best. I don't know how far we'll be successful. Problem came with India. The moment I was elected, I reached out to the Indian Prime Minister, offered that, it's time to reset our relationship. The problems in both countries are poverty. Poverty is the biggest issue, and unemployment. And then climate change. climate change, the global warming is having the biggest impact in the Indo-Ganges plain. The Indus and Ganges plain are most vulnerable to climate change because 80% of our water comes from the mountains, the Himalayas and the Karakoram and the Hindu Kush ranges. Now our glaciers are melting at a much faster rate. 80% of the water in our rivers is from the glaciers. So I reached out and I felt that, time to move on, have a relationship based on trust. In any case, when my party came to power, we had taken a decision. In fact, all parties had taken a decision in 2014. It wasn't implemented. That the legacy of the 80s, where we had militant groups which after the end of the Afghan Jihad, the groups that still existed, we had decided that the state will no longer allow any armed militia in Pakistan. So we already had taken steps, and we've almost disarmed all the groups, and we invited observers also if they wanted to see. So the idea was that the state will not allow any, because Pakistan had suffered because of the militias. Karachi had suffered. I told the Indian Prime Minister that, look, we've taken the steps. Let's have a relationship based on trust. We didn't get it very far. And then we assumed that it's because of the Indian elections and it's the BJP posture of being a nationalist, ultra-nationalist party. Maybe that's why. So we waited. Then after the elections, when we tried to resume talks, again, there was this brick wall we came up against. In fact, we found out that India was trying to push us in the blacklist of FATF, which would have meant bankruptcy for Pakistan. And then we realized that there was something more. We couldn't understand that there was no response from India, and we felt there was an agenda. And that, of course, was revealed on 5th of August, when India unilaterally revoked Article 370, the special status of Kashmir, and since then has basically laid siege, put a curfew on 8 million people in Kashmir. My main reason for coming here on this United Nations General Assembly is because I feel that the world should realize this is a serious situation developing. This is just the beginning. The fact that 8 million people for almost 3 days now are under siege, it's dangerous because whenever the siege lifts, I fear bloodshed. And when there's bloodshed, there will be consequences, repercussions which will go much further outside Kashmir. It will also raise tensions between Pakistan and India, as happened when there was in February, there was a 20-year-old Kashmiri boy, according to his parents, got radicalized by the security forces. He blew himself up. And India blamed us and bombed us. And then also it could have got out of hand, but we immediately returned the pilot. I fear that more of that will happen. Once the curfew is lifted, things will get from bad to worse. I fear that this will have impact not just in Kashmir. There are 180 million Muslims in India. This is going to have a huge impact there. Then, in Pakistan, we have taken all these steps to control all these organizations, disband them, taken over their seminaries. So what happens as this thing gets from bad to worse? Things will deteriorate even in our own country. So it's very important for the world community, the United Nations, to take action now, before things go out. And that really was the purpose of my visit. And I hope I've tried to explain things to all the leaders, world leaders I've met. I hope to speak on this tomorrow. And I hope that the world community acts on this. Unfortunately, I found that, the material is so much more important than the human. And this is, of course, reflected in climate, the world community's attitude to climate change. But this eventually could have far-reaching consequences. And therefore, as I said, I hope that by the time I leave, I hope to meet the UN Secretary General tomorrow, and I hope to convince him. But apart from that, can I say that I feel very optimistic? In my very difficult first year, I feel that the country has tremendous potential. We have, even I, before that, didn't realize that we are sitting on mineral wealth, copper, one of the most fertile agricultural land, a young population. We've opened up Pakistan for tourism. First time we have 70 countries can get visas at the airport in Pakistan. We have made it easier for tourists to go all over, because previously there were problems. Because of the war on terror, there were a lot of problems, so tourists couldn't travel as much. And we have also, as far as religious tourism goes, we have opened up shrines that were important to the Hindu religion, to the Sikh religion, Kartarpur especially, and Buddhism. The whole of North Pakistan was center of Buddhism. So we are opening up our country now for travel, for investors. We have great interest in people now as the economy has stabilized now. We have a lot of people interested in investment in our country. All now we need is stability, peace, and hence again this development in Kashmir is very important for us, that it does not go from bad to worse from where it is now. Thank you.
Here. Do I need this? I think we're fine. Well, Mr. Prime Minister, I want to thank you. You've covered a lot of territory here, and one thing that struck me in my travels throughout Pakistan, I've had 3 posts that have brought me extensively through Pakistan. One was as Deputy U.S. Trade Representative, where we were putting forward the idea of a free trade agreement with Pakistan after 9/11. We're in a different era now. And another was as Condi Rice's economic deputy, and I was in Pakistan the day after the earthquake, and she asked me to coordinate U.S. response, which brought me up through the Himalaya region and up through the earthquake zone. And then I headed the United Nations World Food Program and went throughout the Indus Valley and throughout Swat and Baluchistan. And what struck me is some of what you mentioned here, the absolute beauty of Pakistan. And it was called the Little Switzerland. And tourists would go there and they'd go camping and skiing and hiking in the Great Mountains. And it made me wonder, particularly in Swat, where so many religions and faiths were represented, where that turning point came in history. And I just wonder if you could touch a little bit more on that, on the realization and how we get back to that place of the really unparalleled hospitality that I met throughout Pakistan in my work.
Well, our tourism really suffered after 9/11, because suddenly Pakistan became right in the eye of the storm. The war on terror took a big toll on Pakistan. Tourism finished. Areas became no-go areas for tourists, especially the northwest part of Pakistan. And the entire border strip between the tribal areas between Afghanistan and Pakistan, there was, it just fell into complete turmoil. So that's when tourism nosedived in Pakistan. So what we are trying to do now is, by opening up the visa regime so that it's easy. Before, it was very difficult to get Pakistani visa, when we discovered. Secondly, domestic tourism in Pakistan has taken off. And that's because of the mobile phone. People go somewhere, they take a picture, put it on their Facebook, and then everyone arrives there. And it is 3 years ago when I went to the northern areas, I found that there was no place. All hotels were booked. And all of them, Pakistan had not advertised anything, but it was people going there and on their Facebook, they were putting the pictures. I went to this, and then I started looking for, because I've been in all the northern areas and all the mountain areas ever since we were in school, because our school used to, we had a very adventurous teacher who would take us to the treks up in the mountains. And so I was trying to discover, because the existing holiday resorts or tourist resorts became completely inundated. People were sleeping in cars because there were no hotel rooms. So I tried to find other tourist spots in the mountains. And, you know, our northern areas is twice the size of Switzerland. So I found this area. This was a valley far away in the mountain, 6 hours drive from Dir. And so someone took pictures of that. It put it on our party's website. And in the next 1 month, 100,000 people ended up going there. So it's completely, tourism has changed. So we are now developing this sector properly. We've got investment coming in, opening up more and more areas.
We're going to get to the big issues, but I'm a bit obsessed with the fact that the world, I don't think, ever sees this aspirational Pakistan. And I went and met with master's students at the university in Karachi, and they want to be part of the world, and they want to do business across the borders. And I think you have a generation that's very impatient with the politics of the time, that want to see and be part of the tech business and be able to trade. And it strikes me that the SAARC region used to be the biggest trading zone in the world, and now it's virtually blocked. Do you think in your term or your lifetime, and putting aside what the big issue you're working on this week, just for a moment, that we can see a time in which the region again will be functioning for the benefit of a new generation that has huge aspirations and expectations?
Well, we have suffered for two reasons. One, of course, the war. Afghanistan, actually really the last 40 years, there's been turmoil in Afghanistan, which is why peace is very important. Which is so sad that this peace deal, which was about to be signed, suddenly, from a tweet, we discovered that it had been cancelled. The other is
social
Iran.
Media seems to be running the world here. Facebook, Twitter.
So, and then, Iran, because of this, what's going on right now. But Afghanistan specifically, because that opens up all the way from Pakistan to Central Asia, and that has tremendous potential. We already have this CPAC, which is this route joining Pakistan, the Pakistan-China corridor. Problem, of course, is India, and I'm hoping, you always hope that this is resolved. And once that is, then Pakistan is probably one of the most strategically well-placed country with one big market, the biggest market, China, and then the other second biggest, India, and then, of course, all the energy countries with excess energy on the other side. Hence, peace is very important. The other reason why we have suffered is why countries are poor, basically. Countries are not poor because they lack resources. Countries are poor because corruption destroys their structures, their institutions. And it takes money which should be spent on the human beings. That money ends up being laundered out of the country into Swiss bank accounts and these offshore accounts, and in the name of companies, big flats in New York and in London. And this is the problem with the entire developing world. I have also spoken on this issue too, that if the rich countries really want to help the poor countries, they don't have to give aid to them, because aid doesn't do anything. it is minuscule compared to the money that leaves the poor countries into rich countries every year. It's over $1 trillion, it's estimated, which leaves the poor countries into rich countries. And the poor countries are devastated by corruption. And the reason why they are poor is they do not have strong enough institutions to stop the ruling elite plundering the countries. In fact, the ruling elite does not allow institutions to develop, otherwise they would be caught. So, number one, that money that should be spent to give jobs to people, should be spent on human development, is taken out. Number two, when the money is taken out, it has to be taken out in dollars. So when they buy dollars to take it out, it affects the currency. That devalues. When that devalues, it adds again to corruption. So the richer countries are not motivated at all. There's no political will to stop this. Like, for instance, on drugs money, there are very strong regulations. Even on terror financing, they've really tightened the regulation. But the money which is plundered from the third world, ending up in rich countries, I'm afraid we have been trying now for almost 10 months to try and get the money out. When we've even located the properties bought from stolen money from our country, but we are just stuck. I mean, it's very difficult to retrieve that money. And if the world makes it easier, and I'm saying, it will help the big difference between rich and poor countries is growing all the time. And if this keeps going on like that, you will have to build walls and to keep people out from the rich countries. You will have refugees. Already you have economic migrants. You're going to have climate migrants in the future as well. But this is the worst thing what is happening. The poor countries are getting poorer. This money laundering kills far, far, far more people than anything else in this world, than drugs or anything else.
We're going to also get back to this and turn to the audience. We only have about 20 minutes, but I will take, I think you're passing up questions, so please be sure to do that. So this week, you'll make your biggest pitch yet to the international community on Kashmir. And as you said, the expectations are very high that you're going to be able to move the dial, and you've been doing quiet diplomacy on this, and diplomacy that's made quite a bit of news this week on this. Do you feel you're getting a reception on your perspective on this, and is the dial moving?
Look, I believe that we could only try our best. The rest, you leave it to the Almighty. Now, I have tried my best. In the media, I've tried to make people understand. I've spoken to leaders, almost all the leaders I've spoken to. I think I have made them understand. They might not be moving right now, but I feel that what the Modi government has done, it's boxed itself in by taking this step. I don't think they have really thought through what they have done, because I don't know what is the thinking, that what happens. Have they thought through that when they lift the curfew, what will happen? Do they think that the people of Kashmir will now, after almost 100,000 Kashmiris have died in the last 30 years? Do they think that they will now accept the status quo just because some parliament has passed a resolution illegally taking away their right, which was given to them by the United Nations of self-determination? So what do I think? I think that unless the world community, first of all, it should be aware of what's happening, and I think it is. Secondly, if things begin to deteriorate, they should be able to move. The UN has to move, or the world community. Because you cannot let it go beyond a certain point, because it would eventually pit two nuclear-armed countries facing each other. And that has to be prevented at every stage. It must be, action must be taken now.
And just to clarify on this point, because there's been some media saying that you are issuing a threat of a possible war.
Issuing a threat? Is it issuing a threat or telling the world that be careful before it is too late, warning the world that this is, I mean, it's common sense. I still, as children, we still remember this Cuban crisis when it took place. For years, the world talked about it. Why was there a Cold War? Because the world was petrified of the idea of the other war, because there were two nuclear-armed states. So, I mean, it is common sense that you should be careful. Look, let me, when you say a threat, February, 3:30 a.m. in the morning, my army chief and air chief called me up and said, Indian jets have bombed Pakistan. What do we do? We had already decided that because we could see they were getting ready to bomb us through the radar. So we had, our Air Force had locked up some targets in India. Now question, it was 3:30 a.m. Was there any loss of life? I asked. Had there been loss of life, then they would have immediately retaliated. Because it was dark, we didn't know. So we waited and next day found out there wasn't loss of life. If there was loss of life and then we had gone and bombed them, they would have bombed us, we would have bombed them, and then what? So I mean, as someone who was in that situation where you take a decision, no one should be thinking on those lines when you have the sort of weapons the two countries have. It should never get to that stage. That is the whole point. The whole point is not a threat. It's just telling the world that you should never get into that position.
So we have had President Trump's special envoy on Iran here this week, Brian Hook. We've been at sessions with President Rouhani. You mentioned the dangers of miscalculation in your own area. That's another area where the dangers of miscalculation are very high, and there's a stalemate. All the questions from the audience are on the issue of Kashmir, with one saying, isn't it obvious the world has chosen to stand by India, not Pakistan? Could you talk a little bit more broadly in the region on this danger of miscalculation? And you mentioned the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, who seems central to this. How are we going to unknot what is now growing tensions that have really seem to have hair trigger potential?
If you look at history, all wars are miscalculations. Every war, you look at it. I mean, when Pakistan, when the US decided to invade Afghanistan, and all the political party heads were called over by General Musharraf, and he was saying that, look, we should join the American war on terror, and we should help them. So we asked him that, how long is this going to be? He said, it'll only be a few weeks. And so he said, the Americans are saying it'll only be a few weeks in Afghanistan. You don't know the weapons they've got.
Thank you.
So 70,000 Pakistanis dead 12 years later, we had lost $150 billion plus to the economy. And the Americans are still in Afghanistan, and the war still hasn't ended. Every war, in my opinion, is miscalculated. Miscalculated in a way that you go after one issue to resolve it, it gives birth to other issues. A whole war was supposed to go after Al-Qaeda. ISIS came into being. I really believe that anyone who thinks to settle issues through war, they need to have their head examined. And Iran, and let me tell you about Iran. Iran, if this thing starts, first of all, for developing world, here's some, for the most difficult 1 year has been to try and get our budget to balance our economy, to sort of get some semblance of sanity in it. If this war starts in the Gulf, just the oil prices are going to cause more poverty in the world than anything else. So therefore, everything we should do to avoid this conflict, everything.
So the audience is asking continuing tough questions on this front. including something that I'll preface with a quote by a Sufi poet. So Rumi, I know you appreciate Sufi poetry, who said 800 years ago, "Beyond rightness and beyond wrongness, there is a field. I'll meet you there." So are there ideas out of the box that we're not thinking about? And again, I know there's a specific issue, but you came in, and I think were voted in, with a lot of expectations of bringing a new kind of approach to these issues.
Are you talking about resolving the...
India and Pakistan.
Well, with India, look, let me just explain to you. What is happening in India is a catastrophe. India has been taken over by an extreme racist ideology. If any of you Google RSS, which is what has taken over India, Narendra Modi is a life member of this party called RSS. It was formed in 1925. It was they were inspired by Hitler, Mussolini, by the Nazi Party. They believed in the racial superiority of Hindus. They believed that India is only land for Hindus, not for other minorities. They believed in that the Muslims were invaders, and there was this hatred against Muslims for centuries-old rule which Muslims, when they ruled India, also against the Christians because of the British rule. So it was very clear the admiration for this racist ideology. It was the same ideology that assassinated Mahatma Gandhi in 1948. RSS was outlawed in India as a terrorist organization 3 times. Unfortunately, that ideology today has taken over India. And therefore, when we tried all our efforts for 1 year, I wrote letters, I spoke to him, gave statements. I realized that we had come across an ideology. You can't reason with this. You cannot reason with a racist ideology, because the mere fact, and it's behind it, is arrogance. Simple fact that you feel your race is superior to others is arrogance. And my worry is that it's arrogance that may let you make miscalculations. And this is a miscalculation. This going into Kashmir, putting 8 million people in an open prison with 900,000 troops. A sane mind doesn't do this. In Assam, 1.9 Muslims have just been deregistered as Indian citizens. Now, he hasn't thought through what are they going to do, because Bangladesh has refused to take them. So what are these 1.9 million people going to do? And just the fact that they are saying they have rejected the Nehru and Gandhi philosophy of pluralism and secularism. So where is it headed now? What are 180 million Muslims going to do in India? Or for that matter, Christians or Sikhs. So my worry is also for Indians. What are sensible Indians? What are they thinking about this? And this ideology is, from 6 years where this started, it's going to keep getting worse. Germany from 1930 to 1934 changed from a liberal democracy to a totalitarian fascist state. And unfortunately, if you're following what is happening in India, it is scary. I know India better than any Pakistani, because I used to play cricket there and I had friendships and I used to go there a lot. And I can't recognize this India now. And those Muslims who, when I used to be playing cricket there, who used to tell me that it's a big mistake, Pakistan, India is a bigger society and so on. Today, they're all saying that Jinnah, the founder of Pakistan, was right. This guy, Abdullah, who's just been 80-year-old, who's been put into prison, who all the time supported that Kashmir should be part of India, today he's saying that there is a big mistake that they joined India. So it is a very dangerous direction India has taken. And therefore, all I'm saying is that the Western media should take note of this, because ideologies like that are always dangerous. Whenever you have an ideology like that, racial superiority and hatred against another race, it always does damage to the world.
Why do you think Prime Minister Modi traveled to Pakistan early on? And then, of course, there was the attack in India that really seemed to change that trajectory that he seemed to be trying to pursue. And we had the Foreign Minister Jaishankar in here this week, who had equally harsh words for Pakistan, saying that Pakistan has turned Kashmir into an industry of terrorism. How did we go from Modi's trip to Pakistan to this, and why, where is that Modi?
Well, first of all, Narendra Modi came to Pakistan on the invitation of Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif. While he visited Pakistan, not once did he not stop trying to push Pakistan into being declared a terrorist state. And he tried to differentiate between the Prime Minister and the Pakistan Army. He kept saying that the Prime Minister is a good man, but the Pakistan Army is a terror organization. Look, what has happened? You must understand what has happened since 9/11. Since 9/11, this word Islamic terrorism has been used by governments to delegitimize Muslim freedom struggles. Legitimate Muslim freedom struggles have been demonized by just calling them Islamic terrorism. Simple question. There are 900,000 troops in India. Are they there to fight terrorism? They are saying that one of their defense ministers said there are 500 terrorists lined up on the border to go into India. What are 500 terrorists going to do when there are 900,000 troops there? The 900,000 troops are there to control the population. They're not fighting terrorism. Pakistan fought probably the most difficult war against terror. As I said, we lost 70,000 people. We never used that many soldiers. For counter-terrorism, you don't need 900,000 troops. It's to control the population. And what is actually happening is India is deflecting the state terrorism, which is what is happening in India right now. Read the Human Rights Report. There are two reports on what is happening in the Kashmir Valley. There are 2 mass graves discovered and so on. So they're deflecting the attention as what has happened is the magic word Islamic terrorism, that it's all because of terrorism, that they're using this force. Unfortunately, the UN has not played its part. It should be sending observers there. Let them find out what really is happening. Otherwise, India will keep whatever oppression is happening in Kashmir, they'll blame it on a terrorist from Pakistan.
2 out-of-the-box ideas from the audience. 1, why not grant Pakistan-administered Kashmir freedom and force India to change its approach?
Sorry?
Why not grant Pakistan-administered Kashmir freedom and force India, therefore, to also change its approach?
India has already said that the target is Pakistan side of Kashmir now. Now that they've annexed Kashmir. I believe that what is the future for Kashmir should be decided by people of Kashmir. Whatever the people of Kashmir want. Whatever they want, it's their right to decide. Initially, the 11 UN resolutions 70 years ago, they were all about people of Kashmir to decide whether to join Pakistan or India. I would add that they should be allowed to decide whatever they want. So this is an open offer. Mm-hmm. Why doesn't India and Pakistan both allow them, Kashmiris, to decide?
Next questioner. There's been talk about Pakistan forming relations with Israel, and we know the winds of change are blowing through the Middle East. Is this in the cards, and why?
I'm afraid I don't know where this has come from. It's not. Pakistan has a very straightforward position, and it was a founder of Pakistan, Qaid-e-Azam, Muhammad Ali Jinnah, who was very clear that, there has to be a just settlement, a homeland for Palestinians, before Pakistan can recognize Israel.
President Trump, I believe, said yesterday, Pakistan and India should just come together. It sounded like the Nike ad, just do it. You've mentioned the possible role he could play. What would you like to see the United States, President Trump, doing? And you also mentioned the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia. What role could they play?
Not the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia. That was just between Iran and to ease the tensions with Iran. Well, first of all, I had to explain to President Trump the Kashmir issue, and I think the second time when I had a long chat with him, I managed to explain it to him, and that's why he says that it's a complicated issue. But what U.S. can do is just put its weight behind the United Nations Security Council. And I keep repeating, UN has given their resolutions that it's a disputed territory and had given Kashmiris their right. That right was not given. They are now suffering right now. UN has to take, UN came into being precisely for this dispute like Kashmir, which has a chance of a much bigger strife in the future if this is not addressed. So UN must act now. And if this gets worse, it'd be a total failure of UN.
You said this week the world counts on the U.S. to put out the flames, but you also said after 9/11, it was a huge mistake for Pakistan to do a 180-degree turn toward the U.S. It's a little hard to reconcile these two. Explain.
Actually, it was very straightforward. In 1980s, we trained the Mujahideen. The U.S. came in. The United States backed Pakistan. In fact, all the Western countries, and we trained the Mujahideen. In fact, I remember in London there was a big dinner by an aristocrat raising money for the Mujahideen, and the Mujahideen then were celebrated as heroes. In fact, Ronald Reagan, when he invited the 5 Mujahideen leaders to Washington, I quote him, he said they reminded him of the moral equivalents of the founding fathers of US. So, they were heroes. Now, come 1989, Soviets retreat, leave Afghanistan, the Americans pack up and leave, and Pakistan is left with a lot of those who would have reminded Reagan of them. And in the end, we were slapped with sanctions, pressless sanctions, in 91. Pakistan had 4 million refugees by then. We had these militant groups, all trained and dressed up and nowhere to go. And we had sectarian groups in Pakistan who started fighting each other. So Pakistan became a dangerous place because of this, because of the 80s of participating in the Afghan Jihad. And then, of course, Pakistan got aid, and Pakistan, and also money to train these groups. Now, come 9/11, again the U.S. turns up wants Pakistan's help. They occupy Afghanistan. And I never forget when we were discussing there was a lot of debate going on, should we become part of this or not? And we said that, we were abandoned last time. Most of us said, what guarantees we will again be abandoned this time? And I never forget, George Bush gave a statement that this time will not be the same, we will not abandon Pakistan. And so, of course, he joined it. Why did I not want him to join? Because now we had trained these groups. They were trained, they were indoctrinated in jihad. So foreign occupation in Afghanistan was jihad against the Soviets. Now, when the Americans landed up there, how were you going to tell them that now it's terrorism, then it was jihad, freedom fighting? So because of that, I felt we would have had much more leverage on these groups if we had stayed neutral. The moment we joined the American side, they turned against Pakistan. And that's why we lost 70,000 people.
We're getting the red flags. Just one point. Is China the strongest ally of Pakistan at this point?
Well, when we assumed power, I think never had Pakistan's economy been as bad. So I have to say that China came to support us when we had hit the rock bottom. And they have really helped us in every way. Not only did they provide us help with our foreign exchange reserves because we were about to default, but also the Belt and Road Initiative has sort of evolved where they are helping us in agriculture with our productivity.
Are you worried about sovereignty issues? Are you ownership?
Not at all. Absolutely not, because nowhere have been helped on some condition that you have to do this because we help. Nowhere. And if anything, they have gone out of their way to help us in technology transfer. They're helping us, as I said, in agriculture. They helped us in financing certain projects. So, and the debt part, by the way, is quite low. Everyone kept saying that, we are so in debt to China, but that's not the case.
So we started with a Sufi poet quote. I'm going to end with one. Muhammad Iqbal, the spiritual father of Pakistan, as some call him. He said, "Nations are born in the hearts of poets. They prosper and die in the hands of politicians." You're ending your first year. You have 4 more to go. Are you hopeful that the politicians' power is as great as maybe you hoped coming into office?
I completely agree with that. I always think, what sort of person goes around asking for votes?
I think maybe you've had
serious.
to do that.
I'm serious.
Yes.
No, there's a difference. There's a difference. There are 2 types of politicians. One is the career politician. Career politician is disliked everywhere. Why? Because he compromises all the time. Because to stay in power, he has to ask votes, he has to lie to people, he has to do a lot of times unethical stuff to get votes. He has to bribe people, and all these sort of worst sort of things happen. And so that is the ugly side of politics, and therefore they compromise. The whole thing about what Iqbal says is, why do dreams die with politicians? Because they come up, they sell a dream, but then they keep compromising and making such compromises that the dream disappears. Whereas who I respect and who I admire in my life are, for instance, Gandhi, Jinnah, Quaid-e-Azam. For me, he will always be a role model because he didn't need politics. He came in for a mission. He was in the end dying of cancer, and yet he didn't let anyone know because of the dream of Pakistan. Similarly, Nelson Mandela. Because Jinnah wasn't doing it for power, he was doing it to achieve a goal. And similarly, if you read about Nelson Mandela, I mean, he could have compromised so many times on the way, but the dream of one man, one vote was never compromised. He never compromised on that. So you have to differentiate between the two. The unethical politician, who lies to get into power and, begs for votes and promises everything. And then the whole purpose is power. And then these idealists, throughout history, people who have come up with a certain dream, and then they never compromise on the dream. And they are the ones who Iqbal, the wrong ones he's talking about, but they are the dreamers. And always, it's the dreamers who change the world. It's never the sort of career politicians.
Well, Mr. Prime Minister, you've been most generous with your time. We got through a tenth of our questions, so we welcome you back so we can go through the others at some point in the future. Thank you.
Thank you.